Chapter 1. The night it all came, Apathy City smelled of rain and rot, the way it always did after midnight, when the tourists retreated to their hotels, and the locals knew better than to linger near the old quarter. Sierra Voss knew better too. She'd lived in Verith long enough to understand its unspoken cartography. Which cobblestone streets swallowed sound, which alleyways opened into the territories the police never acknowledged and the newspapers never named. She knew the rules the way a woman learns any set of rules imposed on her by fear, quietly, by heart, and without ever being taught them directly. She broke them anyway. Tonight, of all nights, she broke them. It wasn't recklessness. It was grief wearing the mask of it. The letter had come that morning. 3 lines. Her sister's handwriting slanted left as always, the letters crowding each other like frightened children. I'm not coming back. The house is sold. Don't look for me. No explanation. No address. Just the serrated edge of a life that had quietly been ending while Sierra wasn't watching. She had walked for hours after that, through market squares that shuttered early, and cathedral steps still wet from vespers, until the city's familiar face became strange to her, and strange became acceptable, because it matched the hollow expanding in her chest. That was how she ended up on the Rue des Cendres, Ash Street, which nobody with any sense walked alone after dark. She heard the fight before she saw it, not a brawl. There was a particular rhythm to human violence, adrenaline sloppy, loud with cursing, full of unnecessary noise. This was surgical. A sharp crack of impact, the low hiss of breath expelled through clenched teeth, and then a silence that felt held rather than absent. She rounded the corner, where the streetlight had long since stopped working, and saw them, 4 figures in black, dressed in the kind of tailored severity that belonged to old money or old cruelty, or both, and a 5th figure against the wall. He was tall. She registered that first, the way height becomes relevant when violence is involved. Broad-shouldered beneath a dark coat that had seen better centuries. His face was turned away from her, but she could see the blood, too much of it, running from somewhere beneath his jaw, soaking into his collar with an almost casual thoroughness. He wasn't fighting back. He was enduring, as though he were saving something, waiting for something, or perhaps simply past caring. One of the 4 said something in a language she didn't recognize. Clipped consonants, formal cadence, like law being read aloud. The wounded man said nothing. He turned his head slightly, not toward his attackers, but toward the dark, as if he sensed something shifting in it. As if he sensed her, his eyes found hers across 30 feet of shadow. And Sierra Voss, who had survived a great many things in her 28 years, felt the world stutter. They were not human eyes. She knew that immediately, with the bone-deep certainty of a creature recognizing something older and more dangerous than itself. The irises were the color of amber held to candlelight, pale gold, ringed with darkness, and they did not reflect the street lamp the way eyes should. They absorbed it. They held it still. She should have run. Instead, she said, loudly, and with a conviction she absolutely did not feel, "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." 4 heads turned. She walked forward on legs that felt borrowed. Her heart beat so loud she was briefly certain everyone on the street could hear it. She kept her gaze on his, those impossible eyes, as though breaking the connection might break whatever fragile authority she'd just invented for herself. "My apologies," she said to the 4, slipping her arm through his with the practiced ease of someone who had never done anything so terrifying in her life. "He has a habit of wandering." A pause. The kind of pause in which fates are decided. The tallest of the 4, a woman with silver white hair and a mouth like a blade, looked at Sierra with an expression that was not quite amusement and not quite contempt, but lived in the cold country between them. "The unbound wanders with a human pet now," she said, in accented but precise English. "How very diminished you've become. Seelin of House Morvain." The man beside Sierra said nothing. His arm, where hers was threaded through it, was rigid as iron and cold as the stone wall behind him. But he did not pull away. "We will finish this," the woman continued, her attention sliding back to him like a knife returning to a sheath. "The covenant does not forget broken oaths. Not in 100 years. Not in 1,000. Then the 4 of them stepped back precisely, uniformly, like a single organism, and dissolved into the darkness with a speed that made Sierra's stomach drop. Gone. As though they had been a dream. The street was exhaling. She stood very still. Beside her, the man Seelin, they had called him, exhaled slowly. It was not the sound of relief. It was the sound of a calculation concluding. "You should not have done that," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, with an accent she couldn't place to any country or century she knew. It was the voice of someone who had long since stopped performing calm and simply become it. Probably not, Sierra agreed. Her own voice came out steadier than she deserved. Are you going to thank me, or warn me, or both? He turned to look at her fully for the first time, and she saw the wound properly. A deep cut running from beneath his left ear to his jaw, still bleeding with a sluggishness that seemed to defy basic physiology. In the thin ambient glow of the distant city, his face was all severe angles and old sorrow, like a portrait painted to commemorate something lost. Both, he said. Though not in the order you'd prefer. He took one step, and then his knees buckled, just slightly. Just for a half second, and without thinking she caught him, her hands fisting in the lapels of his coat, his weight pressing briefly against her like a held breath. Where do you live? She asked. He looked at her with those amber eyes. Something moved through them. Surprise, she thought, though she suspected it was a feeling he hadn't needed in a very long time. Nowhere you should follow, he said. That's not an answer. A pause. The city dripped around them. No, he said quietly. It isn't. Chapter 2. The Guest Who Should Not Be. Haressa's apartment was not built for secrets. It was a third-floor walk-up on the Rue Saint-Madeleine, wedged between a bakery that started its ovens at 4 in the morning and a bookshop whose owner had not updated the window display since the previous decade. The ceilings were low. The radiator knocked and hissed through the night like an elderly pensioner settling into bed. Every wall held evidence of her books stacked in leaning towers. Half-finished charcoal sketches pinned without frames. A ceramic mug on the windowsill that had held cold tea for 3 days because she kept forgetting to drink it. It was the apartment of a woman who lived quietly, carefully, and largely alone. She brought a vampire into it at midnight. He didn't ask where she lived. He simply followed when she walked, which she chose to interpret as trust rather than threat, because the alternative was too unsettling to carry up 3 flights of stairs. He climbed without sound, no footfall, no creak of the ancient wood steps, and she found herself making more noise than usual to compensate, her keys jangling, her coat rustling, her breath deliberate and human and loud. Inside, she turned on the lamp by the door. Its amber light fell across him and she stopped moving. He was looking at the room the way she imagined archaeologists looked at sealed tombs, with a careful, measuring attention, as though every object were evidence of something. His eyes moved across the spines of her books, the sketch pinned above the fireplace, the single dying plant on the kitchen windowsill she had not yet committed to throwing away. His coat was dark with dried blood now, the wound at his jaw no longer actively bleeding, but still angry looking, still wrong in its depth. Sit down, she said. He looked at her. Please, she added. Not because he intimidated her, though he did, but because she'd been raised by a woman who believed manners were armor. And old habits were the last things grief stripped away. He sat, not on the sofa, which would have been reasonable, but on the straight-backed chair near the fireplace, with the particular deliberateness of a man choosing a position rather than a comfort. His hands rested on his knees. His spine did not touch the chair back. He was, she realized, positioned to stand quickly. She went to the bathroom for the first aid kit she kept under the sink. A real one, well-stocked, because she was a woman who lived alone in a city and had long since made peace with the practicalities of that. When she came back, he was watching the dead fireplace with an expression she couldn't read, and the lamplight made the angles of his face look carved rather than merely sharp. I need to clean that, she said, nodding at his jaw. It will heal. It's still bleeding. Less than before. That's a low bar. She pulled the ottoman close and sat across from him, opening the kit. I'm going to clean it regardless. You can argue while I work. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of the memory of one, perhaps. He didn't argue. She worked in silence for a moment, cleaning the wound with antiseptic and a steadiness she was quietly proud of, given that her hands wanted very badly to shake. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Not because he was frightening, precisely, but because he was so completely still. No unconscious movement, no fidgeting, no subtle shift of weight or restless breath. He sat the way old stone sat, as though stillness were his natural state, and everything else was performance, and he was cold. Not the cold of someone who'd been standing in rain, but a deeper cold, structural, as though warmth were simply a property he hadn't inherited. Celine, she said, without looking up from her work. Is that your name, or a title? Both, he said. In the old usage. The woman with the white hair. She called you unbound. A pause. Just a beat too long to be nothing. Yes. What does it mean? That I no longer belong to a house. His voice carried no inflection on it. Not bitterness. Not relief. Not grief. Just the fact of it. Flat as a stone. In our world, that is either freedom or disgrace, depending on who you ask. Our world. She registered the phrase without comment, pressing a gauze pad to his jaw. And the covenant they mentioned? Laws, he said. Old ones. Binding ones. The kind written in blood rather than ink, which means they cannot be amended, cannot be repealed, and cannot be ignored without consequence. And you broke one. It was not a question. His silence confirmed it anyway. She sat back, studying her work. The wound was too deep for what she could offer, but the bleeding had genuinely slowed faster than it should have, she thought, for an injury that size. Faster than human physiology allowed. You're not going to ask me what I am, he said. I know what you are. She began packing the kit back together, keeping her hands occupied because it helped her think. I've lived in Verith for 6 years. You learn things. The old quarter, the houses with the sealed windows, the way certain people move at night like they own the dark. She paused. I've just never been stupid enough to end up in a conversation about it until tonight, and yet here you are, and yet here I am. He looked at her then, truly looked, with that amber gaze that absorbed rather than reflected, and she held it, because looking away felt like losing something she hadn't yet named. You saved my life tonight, he said, without knowing me, without any reason to. I had a reason. What reason? She thought of the letter. 3 lines. Her sister's borrowed handwriting carving out an absence. I was tired, she said simply, of standing by while something broke. The radiator knocked and hissed. Outside, the city moved without them. He said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, as though testing a word he hadn't used in some time, thank you, Sira Voss. She hadn't told him her name. She chose, for now, not to mention that. Chapter 3. The things she was not supposed to know to see. He was gone by the time she woke, or so she thought. Sira came out of her bedroom at 7:30, still in yesterday's clothes, her hair half unraveled from its braid, and found the straight-backed chair empty. The ottoman was returned to its place. The first aid kit sat folded, closed, on the kitchen counter. She didn't remember leaving it there, and beside it, with a precision that felt deliberate, her ceramic mug had been moved from the windowsill to next to the kettle. As if someone had noticed it was cold and thought, without being asked, that she might want it warmer. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment, then she heard it. The quietest sound, barely a shift of pressure, barely breath, from the direction of the small room at the end of the hall. The one she used for storage. The one with no window. She pushed the door open slowly. He was there, folded into the narrow space between a stack of moving boxes and the wall. His coat draped over him like a blanket, his eyes fully closed. In the dim light that crept under the door, he looked younger somehow. Not young. Exactly. Nothing about him suggested youth. But the severity had eased from his face in sleep, leaving something underneath it that she couldn't name. Something worn. Something that had been carrying weight for a very long time. She shut the door quietly and stood in the hallway with her back against the wall. He'd found the only room with no light. Of course he had. She made tea. She went to work. She did not think about him, or rather, she thought about nothing else, which was its own particular kind of discipline. She worked from home 3 days a week, translating academic texts for a university press that paid badly and needed her constantly. Today's assignment was a 13th century ecclesiastical manuscript, which, under normal circumstances, she would have found absorbing. Today she read the same paragraph 4 times and retained approximately none of it. At noon she made soup. The smell of it filled the apartment, onion and thyme, and the particular comfort of something simmering, and she wondered, with a detachment that didn't quite hold, whether he could smell it through the closed door, whether he felt hunger, the way she understood it as a physical lobbying, an insistence of the body, whether he felt anything at all in that suspended state, behind that closed door, in that lightless room. She left a glass of water on the floor outside, because she didn't know what else to do. At 3 in the afternoon, she heard him move, not dramatically. No creak of floorboard, no announcement of presence, just a gradual, peripheral awareness that the apartment had changed in density, that there was something in the hallway that hadn't been there before. She kept her eyes on her laptop screen. You left water, he said, from somewhere behind her left shoulder. Habit, she said. I leave water for things I'm not sure how to categorize. A pause. Am I a thing? I'm still deciding. She heard him move into the kitchen, heard the particular sound of someone standing still in a room they are studying rather than inhabiting. She turned in her chair. He looked better. The wound at his jaw had closed in a way that should have taken stitches in a week, reduced now to a dark seam that would probably be gone by morning. His coat was gone, left in the storage room, presumably. And without it, he was somewhat less architectural. Just a man in dark clothes standing in her kitchen, examining the spines of the books she kept on the counter because she ran out of shelf space 2 apartments ago. You translate, he said, reading the manuscript title visible on her screen. Old languages. Latin. Occasionally Church Slavonic. Medieval French when the press is desperate. She watched him. You're not reading from that distance. I have excellent eyesight. You're reading a reflected laptop screen from 8 feet away. He set the book down. You said you knew what I was. I said I knew what you were. I'm still cataloging the specifics. She turned fully to face him, pulling one knee up to her chest. You don't breathe when you're thinking. You found the only dark room in the apartment without looking. Your wound healed overnight, and you knew my name before I told it to you. He was quiet for a moment. You're observant. I'm a translator. I notice what isn't being said. She tilted her head. How did you know my name? He crossed to the window careful, she noted, to stay at the angle where direct sun didn't reach and looked out at the street below. In the afternoon light his skin was very pale, and the shadows under his eyes had the depth of something permanent rather than tired. I could smell it on you, he said. That's not the precise answer, but it's the closest approximation in your language. Old things leave traces. Your name was on the letterbox. Your neighbor called to you as you came in. Small details compound. He paused. I notice what isn't being hidden. Is that a warning? It's a symmetry. He turned from the window. You notice what isn't said. I notice what isn't hidden. Between the two of us, very little would stay concealed for long. The afternoon light sat between them, full of dust and implication. You should leave, he said. The words were flat, but not unkind. The voice of a man reading from a script he believed in even when he didn't want to. Whatever debt you feel you earned last night, you've surpassed it. You're sheltering someone. The covenant is hunting. That makes you visible to them. And visible is dangerous. Yes. She met his gaze without flinching. You can finish the warning. I'll still be here when you're done. Something moved through his eyes, not irritation, closer to recognition. The particular unsettlement of encountering something familiar in a place you thought was entirely foreign. Why? He asked, and there was genuine weight to it, genuine want of understanding. You owe me nothing. You have a life, small, quiet, but yours. Why would you risk it? She thought about the letter again. 3 lines. An absence wearing her sister's handwriting. Because small and quiet stopped feeling like enough, she said. About 12 hours before I met you. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, a church bell struck the 1/4 hour, and the city went on without asking permission. You'll want to know what I am, he said finally. Exactly. Only when you're ready to tell me. He turned back to the window. That, he said quietly, may take longer than you have. She pulled her laptop close and went back to her medieval manuscript. Then we'd better start soon. Chapter 4. What lives beneath the ice? He stayed, not because she asked him to. She didn't. Not because he had nowhere else to go. She suspected that wasn't entirely true. He stayed the way weather stays, settling into the apartment with a gradual, inevitable presence that rearranged the air around it without asking permission. By the second night she had stopped flinching at the peripheral stillness of him. By the third she had moved her second chair to face the fireplace. Because he kept returning to the first one. And it seemed unkind to make him stand. They developed a rhythm, cautious and unspoken, as most honest things are. She worked through the afternoons, while he kept to the storage room or moved through the apartment with that soundless deliberateness. Never disturbing anything, occasionally setting her cold cups of tea near her elbow without comment. She left the lamp on low through the nights because it helped her think, and he tolerated the light with the particular stoicism of someone accustomed to tolerating things far worse. She cooked. He didn't eat not food anyway, but he would sit at the kitchen table while she did, turning the pages of whatever book he'd borrowed from her shelves. And the domesticity of it was so strange, and so oddly comfortable that she had stopped examining. It closely in the interest of preserving her own equilibrium. It was on the fourth night that he told her something. True. She had been sketching. Charcoal on cartridge paper, working from memory. Which was how she always worked when her mind was processing something it hadn't finished with yet. She'd been drawing the cathedral on the hill without meaning to. Its spires emerging from the paper the way they emerged from the city's skyline, without apology. Demanding vertical attention. You draw from grief, he said. She looked up. He was watching her from his chair. The book closed on his knee, his amber eyes steady and unhurried in the low light. What makes you say that? Your hand slows when you reach the details. Most artists rush toward detail. It's where the satisfaction lives. You slow down, as though you're delaying arrival. He paused. As though completing the picture makes the memory it came from more finished than you want it to be. The charcoal sat still in her hand. You've been watching me draw for 3 nights. I watch most things. It's a very old habit. He turned the book over once in his hands, a rare unconscious gesture. I don't mean it intrusively. I simply notice. And he stopped. I'm what? A beat. Interesting to watch. In the way that honest things are interesting. She set the sketch down. The cathedral stared up at her, incomplete, its highest spire just suggested rather than finished. What are you reading? Your book on medieval siege architecture. He held it up without expression. I was present for the construction of one of the fortresses it describes incorrectly. She stared at him. Which one? The Castle Morvain. His voice didn't change, but something shifted beneath it. A minor seismic event, felt rather than heard. They have the Eastern Barbican entirely wrong. The passage ran north, not east. The architect's notes were burned in a fire 1487. I believe, and the academic record never recovered the correct plans. You remember the plans. I commissioned them. The fireplace breathed between them. She pulled her knees up, recalibrating, the way she always did when reality shifted its dimensions without warning. How old are you? She asked. Old enough that the question stopped mattering for a very long time. He set the book on the arm of the chair. I was turned in the early part of what your histories call the 14th century. I have not always tracked the years with care. Grief is a poor timekeeper. You said grief. He looked at the fire. Yes. She waited. She had learned, over these quiet nights, that he spoke the way old structures settled slowly, under accumulated pressure, releasing only what had been held too long to hold safely. There was a woman, he said at last. Before, a human woman. He paused for a long time. She died because of what I was. Not by my hand. I want that understood. But by the consequences of my world pressing into hers. The covenant has rules about human entanglement. I broke them. The house I belonged to then, House Morvain, my makers enforced the law's penalty. Not upon me. He stopped. Upon her. The room was very quiet. They killed her, Syrah said softly. Not a question. They made me watch. His voice remained level. That steadiness, she understood now, was not coldness. It was the architecture of a man who had rebuilt himself around a void and learned to call the structure composure. And then they called it mercy for her and a warning for me. I left the house the following night. I have been unbound since. Nearly 700 years. She said nothing for a while. The charcoal sketch sat between them, the cathedral's unfinished spire, pointing at nothing. That's why you told me to leave, she said. That night in the alley, and every night since. History is a reliable teacher, if nothing else. I'm not her, Syrah said carefully. I'm not a repetition. He turned from the fire to look at her, and the expression on his face was so precisely the intersection of hope and terror that it cost her something to hold his gaze. No, he said. You're entirely your own. That is not simpler. She reached across and picked up her sketch. With 3 deliberate strokes she finished the spire clean, complete, committed. Tell me about the house, she said. Tell me how it works. The covenant, the politics. If I'm already visible to them, I'd rather be informed. He watched her finish the drawing. Something in him seemed to exhale not breath, but the longer exhalation of a weight briefly shared. The house's number 4, he said quietly. Or they did. Now 3, and a pretender. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time he looked not like a monument, but like a man with something urgent to explain. The one hunting me is House Varak. They want what I carry, a blood oath, bound into my blood to centuries ago. That gives its holder claim over a territory the houses have been warring over since before your country had a name, and you won't give it to them. I won't let them take it. His eyes met hers. There is a difference. She nodded slowly, filing it away, turning it over. Outside, rain had begun to fall against the windows, soft and insistent, the way important things tend to arrive. Then we need a plan, she said. He blinked. An almost human moment, rare and unguarded. You said we. I did. She closed the sketchbook. Get used to it. Chapter 5. When the walls begin to close, the first sign was the silence. Sierra noticed it on a Tuesday morning. The bakery beneath her apartment, which had run its ovens with clockwork reliability every day for 6 years, did not start at 4. She lay awake in the pre-dawn dark, waiting for the smell of bread and the knock of industrial mixers, and heard nothing. Just the rain, still falling, and the particular quality of quiet that a city produces when something in it has gone wrong. She mentioned it to Celine when she brought coffee to the kitchen at 7:30. He was already awake. She had stopped wondering when he slept exactly, since it seemed to require less than she'd assumed, standing at the kitchen window at the careful angle that kept direct light off him, looking down at the street with an expression she had come to recognize as the one he wore when he was calculating rather than simply watching. The bakery, he said. Before she spoke, you noticed. I noticed 2 hours ago. He didn't turn from the window. The owner's name is Duard. He arrives at 3:40 every morning. He did not arrive today. His cat is still inside. I can hear it. He paused. There are also 2 men in the doorway of the bookshop across the street who have not moved in 90 minutes and are not reading the books in the window. Sierra set the coffee down slowly. House Varek. They're observers. Scouts in your terminology. His jaw tightened. They don't yet know which building. They're narrowing a radius. How long before they narrow it to this one? 12 hours. Perhaps less. She sat down at the kitchen table with the steadiness of someone who has decided in advance to be steady. Then we need to talk about what the blood oath actually does. You've explained what it is. I need to understand what happens if Varek gets it. He turned from the window then, and she saw it on his face. The reluctance of a man about to say something he has kept private through sheer force of will for longer than most civilizations last. He sat across from her. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at them for a moment, as though reviewing something. The covenant divides the old territories into 4 jurisdictions, he began. Not by geography alone, by right of blood. Each house holds dominion over its territory through a blood oath sworn at the founding, 8 centuries ago. The oath doesn't simply grant political authority. It grants access to the old places, the buried courts, the networks of human influence the houses have built across centuries of careful, quiet work. He paused. Banks, governments, medical institutions, information infrastructures, things your world runs on without knowing who built the foundations. She absorbed this carefully. And the territory your oath covers is the largest. The northern jurisdiction, spanning what you would call 6 countries. He looked up. Varek has held the southern territory for 3 centuries. They are powerful and patient and entirely without mercy. If they absorb the northern jurisdiction through my oath, there is no house strong enough to balance them. The covenant becomes ceremonial. House Varek becomes a monopoly, Sierra said, an empire, with infrastructure already embedded in human systems at every level. He held her gaze. This is not an abstract power struggle, Sierra. If Varek takes the oath, the consequences distribute through your world, like toxin through water, quietly, irreversibly, and the humans who would suffer most would be the ones who already have the least protection. The rain tapped at the window. She thought about what he'd said, the particular weight of quietly, irreversibly, and felt the shape of the thing they were inside change around her. It had been personal up until now, dangerous and strange and intimate, but personal. A woman and a wounded man in a small apartment, a story with edges she could trace. Now the edges were gone. Duard, she said. The baker. They took him to draw you out? To draw me to ground first. Confirm my location. Then take him as leverage if needed. His voice was flat with a fury held at absolute zero. It is how Varek has always operated. They press through human lives, because they know it costs me more than it costs them. We have to get him back. We have to leave before they complete the radius. Celine, she said his name with enough weight that he stopped. Duard is 63 years old and makes the best almond croissants in this quarter and has never done anything to anyone. We are not leaving him with House Varek's scouts as a loose end. He looked at her for a long moment. The amber in his eyes had darkened. She had learned this happened when his control was working hardest. If I go to him, he said carefully. I confirm my location. If we go to him, she said. We control the timing. He was quiet for a beat. Then, almost despite himself, you have a plan. I have the beginning of one. She pulled her laptop across and opened the building's shared maintenance directory. She had the login from an argument with a landlord 2 years ago that had never been resolved in anyone's favor. This building connects to the one behind it through the basement. Pre-war construction. There's a schematic in the property records. She turned the screen toward him. Duard's bakery has a delivery entrance on the next street. If you go through the basement connection, I remain off the street. He studied the screen. Something shifted in his face. The calculation in it, but also something else. Something that looked almost like the unfamiliar shape of being surprised by someone else's competence. And the scouts watching this building remain watching this building, while I leave through the front door, visibly, alone, with a shopping bag. Like a woman who needs groceries. You become a distraction. I become a distraction, she agreed. It's not my first time being underestimated. He stood. He moved to the window one final time, looking down at the two unmoving figures in the bookshop doorway. And his expression carried the cold precision of a man who had fought a very long war and knew exactly what the opening of a new engagement felt like. There will be more than scouts at the bakery, he said. If I meet resistance, then I hear something and I call the number you're going to give me before we leave this apartment. She stood too, reaching for her coat. A real number, not another deflection. He looked at her across the kitchen. This small, careful room that had somehow become the center of something very large. You're afraid? He said quietly. I can hear it. Yes. She pulled her coat on. I'm also still going. She met his eyes. Does that mean anything, in your world? He held her gaze with an expression she had no name for yet. Something ancient learning a new vocabulary. In my world, he said, it means everything. Chapter 6. The weight of what he carried. They found Duard in the cold storage room of his own bakery. Bound and frightened, but unharmed a deliberate cruelty, Seelin explained quietly. As they helped the old man out through the delivery entrance, Varek left their hostages intact until they became inconvenient. It was a precision their enemies had learned to read as threat rather than mercy. Duard, to his considerable credit, asked no questions. He was a man who had lived in Varet's old quarter for 40 years. And 40 years in the old quarter taught a person when not to ask questions, the way other cities taught their residents to cross on the green. He pressed Sierra's hand once, hard, and then his nephew's address was produced from his coat pocket, and he walked away into the narrow street without looking back. The basement passage. Back was darker than the schematic had suggested. Rough stone walls, a low ceiling, a smell of cold earth and standing water that pressed against Sierra's chest like a held breath. Seelin moved ahead of her, without a light source, navigating by whatever sense he used in the dark, one hand occasionally appearing at her elbow when the floor changed level without warning. They were halfway through when she said, "Tell me the rest." His hand was at her elbow. He didn't remove it. Now? He said, "We have approximately 4 minutes in a tunnel where neither of us can go anywhere." She kept walking, following the pale suggestion of his shape in the dark. "Tell me what you haven't told me." All of it. A long breath, one of his deliberate ones, the kind he used in place of the instinctive human sigh. "I was not merely turned," he said. "I was made, specifically, intentionally, for a purpose." His voice was low and even in the dark, a sound that belonged to enclosed spaces and old confessions. "The man who turned me was the founder of House Morvain, Aldrich. He was building something a counterweight to the other houses, who were already consolidating power in ways the Covenant had not anticipated. He needed someone with particular qualities. What qualities? Human ones. A pause. Empathy. Strategic patience. The capacity to hold loyalty without demanding it. Aldrich believed the houses were failing because they were turning soldiers and courtiers and politicians people already shaped by power. He wanted someone shaped by the lack of it. He paused again. "I was a cartographer's apprentice. I mapped borders for men who moved them. I had no power, no lineage, no particular significance, and he chose you. He watched me for a year first. The way I negotiated with difficult clients. The way I dealt with the merchants who tried to underpay the workers on my survey teams. A brief silence. The way I mapped disputed territories, not favoring the patron who hired me, but marking the land as it actually was. He said it was the most radical thing he had seen in 3 centuries. Sierra thought about a young man with ink-stained hands drawing the world honestly, when everyone around him was drawing it usefully. He wasn't wrong, she said. He was also not entirely honest with me about what I would become. The stone floor leveled out, and she could see the faint outline of the door ahead. A thin rectangle of relative light. I was not told about the blood oath until it was already sealed. It was bound into my making, woven into the transformation itself, so that it lives in my blood as intrinsically as my nature. It cannot be surgically removed. It cannot be transferred willingly. To take it from me, they would have to kill you. They would have to unmake me, which is a longer process than simple death and considerably less kind. She stopped at the door. In the thin light, she could see his face, the sharp lines of it, the wound now almost gone. The amber eyes carrying something she recognized now as the specific exhaustion of a truth too long withheld. Aldrich died 4 centuries ago, he said. Without him, the house fractured. When I left after Alara, the name surfaced quietly, the name of the woman who had died, the name he had not said until now. When I left, I took the oath with me, which means I have spent 400 years as the most valuable and the most hunted thing in our world. With no house to shelter behind, and no political currency except the very thing everyone wants to take from me. That's why you're unbound, she said. Not as a punishment, as a consequence. The covenant calls it disgrace. I call it the only honest position available. He looked at her steadily. I could have sold the oath, traded it for protection, for a new house, for any number of comfortable arrangements. I have been offered kingdoms, in the old sense of that word. His jaw tightened. Varric has offered me a seat at their council twice, sealed with blood contract. Everything I would need to stop running, and you've refused twice, because a seat at Varric's council is a leash with a velvet lining. His voice was quiet and absolute. And because the oath covers the Northern Territory, 6 countries, as I told you. Varric gaining it does not simply mean political dominance. It means access to the deep infrastructure. And within that infrastructure there are blood farms, Sira. The words landed in the cold air of the passage. Facilities, he continued, his voice holding its terrible evenness. Where humans are kept as a resource. Consensual feeding is the covenant law. It is the law all houses publicly observe. Varric observes it publicly. He met her eyes. The deep infrastructure is not public. She stood very still for a moment, processing, filing, refusing to let the horror of it paralyze her, because paralysis was not useful. How many people? In the Northern Territory alone, if Varric gains access, thousands. Over time. He held her gaze. This is what I have been carrying for 400 years. This is why I will not trade it away for comfort. And this, his voice shifted, barely perceptibly, towards something rawer. This is why I told you to leave. Because the people who stand near me become visible. And visible people in my world become leverage, or allies, she said. You are not equipped. I helped you rescue a 63-year-old baker from vampire scouts this morning using a property management database and a shopping bag. She held his gaze. Do not tell me what I'm equipped for. The silence between them was different from the other silences they'd built together. Heavier, more load-bearing. There is one more thing, he said. His voice had changed again, quieter now, carrying the weight of something he clearly had not said to another living person in a very long time. The blood oath can be anchored, stabilized, made untakeable even through unmaking, through a willing bond with a human. A blood sharing freely given on both sides. She understood immediately. That's what Varric thinks you're doing. Why? They're closing in now. They believe I have found someone willing. His eyes did not leave hers. They are not wrong that I have found someone. They are wrong about my intentions. He said it precisely, carefully, the way he said everything that mattered. I will not use you, Sira. I want that understood before anything else. I have never used a human to anchor the oath. I chose solitude over that, for 400 years. I will not change that position, because Varric is pressing close, and it would be convenient. She looked at him for a long quiet moment. The man who had been made for his human qualities and spent centuries trying not to use them on another human being. I know, she said simply. He blinked. That rare, unguarded human blink. I know you won't use me, she said. That's not what worries me. She pushed the door open, letting in the gray afternoon air, the smell of rain and cobblestones, and the ordinary city going about its ordinary life above their heads. What worries me is that we're running out of time to figure out what we're actually doing instead. She stepped through the door. After a moment, he followed. Chapter 7. The night the city held. Its breath had 3 hours before Varek moved. Seelan knew it the way he knew most things, not through logic alone, but through the accumulated instinct of a creature who had survived long enough to read the particular stillness that precedes coordinated violence. It was in the air, in the quality of the dark gathering at the end of the street, in the way the cats of the old quarter had all gone inside. He told Sira at 9 o'clock. She nodded once, set down the manuscript she was not reading, and said, "Then we stop waiting for them to choose the ground." He looked at her. "You've been defensive for 400 years, she said. "How's that working?" It startled something out of him that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same family. A short, involuntary exhale of something that had forgotten how to be anything except controlled. She was already moving to her desk, pulling out the architectural schematic she'd printed from the property records, spreading it on the kitchen table with the focused calm of someone who had decided what kind of person they were going to be tonight. "The building has a roof access," she said. "Cast iron stairs on the north face. They'll expect you at street level or at the door. They won't expect you above them." She looked up. "And they definitely won't expect me. You are not engaging Varek's fighters directly." "I'm not planning to fight anyone." She reached under the kitchen sink and produced a bottle of industrial cleaning bleach and 2 boxes of the iron supplement tablets she took every morning, setting them on the table with the matter-of-fact energy of someone who had been quietly thinking about this all day. "Iron and UV. You told me 3 nights ago. The 2 contact vulnerabilities all houses share regardless of bloodline. Iron filings in suspension burn like acid. Concentrated UV. How do you have a UV light source?" She crossed to the storage room and returned with the grow lamp she used for the herbs she kept on the fire escape in summer, now affixed with a portable battery pack she'd cannibalized from a camping lantern. "I'm a woman who lives alone," she said simply. "I maintain an extensive toolkit." He stared at the grow lamp, then at her, with an expression that moved through several distinct registers before settling on something she could only describe as deeply unsettled respect. "The iron suspension," he said carefully. "That's the bleach carrier? Dissolved iron tablets. The bleach keeps it from precipitating out." She held up the spray bottle she'd already prepared. "I've made 4. They're under the bathroom sink. I also know which of my neighbors are away this week. I'm on the building message group, which means the top 2 floors are clear. If you need to move fast through the building, you won't be stepping over anyone." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been planning this since the tunnel." "I've been planning this since Tuesday morning when the bakery went quiet." She met his gaze. "I told you I'd be useful. I just needed you to tell me enough about your world to work with." He crossed to the window. Below, the street had developed, the peculiar emptiness of a stage being cleared before the main act. 3 minutes later he said, "They're positioning. 4 to the front, 2 on the roof of the opposite building, a 7th covering the alley. 7 total. Varek sends 7 for a contained extraction. It means they still want me alive." His voice was entirely level. "For now. 7th is on your roof position, which means I need a different angle." He turned. "The bakery connection. If I move through the basement before they're fully positioned, the basement will already have someone in it." She picked up one of the spray bottles, testing the weight. "Leave the basement to me. Sira Seelan." She said his name with the same quiet authority she'd used in the tunnel. The register that had somehow, over these strange, careful days, become the sound of 2 people trusting each other. "Let me do the part I can do. You do the part only you can do." "That's the plan." He looked at her for a long moment. The lamplight moved in his eyes. "If anything goes wrong," he started, "then I have 4 spray bottles and a woman's deep personal history with being underestimated." She held his gaze. "Go." The next 20 minutes were the most concentrated of her life. She went down to the basement alone, spray bottle in hand, grow lamp slung over her shoulder on its battery strap. The scout Varek had placed there was young looking. They always were, she'd learned. Immortality had a habit of preserving whatever age a person wore when they were turned, and had the predatory stillness of someone who had been waiting for a very long time. He stepped out of the shadows and she hit him with the UV lamp at full intensity before he completed the Step. The sound he made was not something she would describe to anyone afterward. She followed it immediately with the spray bottle, the iron suspension catching the light as it arced. And the reaction was instantaneous and terrible and extremely effective. And she looked away because looking had not been part of her plan. She was up the stairs and through the building and out the north fire exit in under 3 minutes. On the roof, she heard the fight. It was not like human violence. There was no excessive noise, no breathless cursing. It was the sound of very old things moving at speeds that defied comfortable categorization and impact. And once a sound like architecture being briefly reconsidered, then silence, she found him on the fire escape of the opposite building. 3 of the 7 dealt with. The others apparently scattered when the basement scout failed to signal. His coat was torn across one shoulder and there was blood his own on his right hand. And he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, raw, unarchitected. The face of a man who had just watched someone he could not afford to care about walk into danger, for him, and was not handling the feeling of it with any of his customary composure. The basement scout, he said, gone. She climbed the last step to reach him. I'm intact. He caught her wrist, not grabbing, just holding, a touch so careful it undid something in her chest. Are you? Not a question. A need. Yes, she said. I'm entirely intact. His hand didn't move from her wrist. His thumb was against her pulse point. She felt it there, warm pressure against the beat of her blood, and she understood with sudden clarity that he was not taking something. He was simply feeling the evidence that she was alive, that she was here, that the worst had not happened. Seelan, she said softly. Give me a moment, he said. His voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. Just give me a moment. She did. The city spread below them, dark and gleaming with rain, entirely indifferent and entirely beautiful. And she stood on a fire escape in the cold air, with a 700-year-old vampire's hand on her wrist, and felt for the first time since 3 lines of her sister's handwriting had carved out the hollow in her chest something filling it, not completing it, not erasing it, simply residing alongside it, something that intended to stay. Chapter 8. The distance between survival and something. Elsathi left the city before dawn, not dramatically. No racing through streets. No pursuit visible in the mirrors of the car Seelan had produced from a garage to blocks east of her apartment with the quiet efficiency of a man who maintained contingency plans the way other people maintain savings accounts. She had 15 minutes to fill a bag. She took her sketchbook, her translation drive, 2 changes of clothes, and the ceramic mug from the windowsill. She didn't examine why she took the mug. Some decisions were clearer without examination. He drove. Of course, he drove. She suspected he had been navigating roads since before the concept of roads was formalized, and she sat in the passenger seat watching the city she had lived in for 6 years recede in the side mirror with the particular grief of leaving something before you are ready, which is the only way anyone ever leaves anything that mattered. They did not speak for the first hour. The road unrolled north through darkness, through flat farmland and sleeping villages and the occasional lit window that suggested someone else awake at this hour, unable or unwilling to surrender tonight. Seelan drove with one hand, the other resting on the gear shift, his eyes on the road with an attention that never wavered, and never quite looked like concentration, because it required none. She watched him in the dim light of passing road signs and felt the weight of the evening settling into her body the way cold settles gradually, completely, finding every unguarded place. You're angry, she said. Around the 90-minute mark. No, you're something. A pause. The road curved gently north. I'm processing, he said, with the careful precision of a man choosing words from a vocabulary he didn't fully trust. What happened tonight, what you did, was effective, necessary, possibly the reason I'm sitting here rather than in a Varrock facility. He stopped. It is also something I will spend considerable time not thinking about, because it frightens you. He didn't answer. Which was its own answer. Seelan, she turned in the seat to face him. I made an informed choice, with full awareness of the risks. You did not put me in that basement. I walked myself there with a spray bottle I made from iron tablets and bleach. She paused. I need you to let me own that decision. You could have died. So could you. Every night for 700 years apparently. She held his profile in her gaze. The severe clean lines of him. The jaw she'd cleaned blood from 4 nights ago. the hands that had held her wrist on the fire escape with such devastating care. The difference is that when you're in danger, it doesn't occur to you to feel guilty about it. You simply survive. I'd like the same courtesy. He was quiet for a long time. The road signs shifted from French to the bilingual markers of the borderlands, and the landscape opened into something older and less managed. Dark forests pressing close to the road's edge. Hills rising in the middle distance. She was braver than me, he said at last, quietly, not looking away from the road. Elara, I spent 3 years telling her the same things I've been telling you. That proximity was dangerous. That my world pressed into human lives like a tide that didn't recede. His voice had the texture of something that had been held at absolute stillness for a very long time and was moving. Slightly, for the first time. She told me I was using danger as a reason to avoid living. She was right. She died because of it, Sierra said softly. She died because I let myself believe that being careful was the same as being safe. His hand tightened briefly on the wheel. It isn't. Careful. People die in my world just as carelessly as anyone else. The only variable I can control is how much of my world I allow to press into theirs. He stopped. Your world. And instead you've been choosing total isolation for centuries. It seemed the most honest arithmetic. It's not arithmetic, she said. It's punishment. The word landed in the car's interior and stayed there, among the dark miles and the hum of the engine, occupying more space than a single word should reasonably require. He didn't respond. He pulled off the main road onto a narrower one, following some internal navigation she couldn't read, and they climbed into the hills, through forests that closed above them like a cathedral's arching ceiling. And she sat with the knowledge that she'd said something true, and let him carry it without softening it. The house appeared out of the trees after another 20 minutes. Stone. Old 2 stories, set at the end of a track that didn't appear on standard maps. The kind of property that had been maintained for centuries by people who understood the value of places that didn't appear on standard maps. Morvain property? She asked, stepping out into air that smelled of pine and cold earth. Former. It passed to me when the house dissolved. He retrieved her bag from the back seat. It's warded. Varek's scouts won't feel it from the road. Inside was cleaner than abandonment should have permitted. Someone maintained it. Or something did, though she decided not to press on that particular logistics question tonight. Stone floors, heavy curtains, furniture that was old without being decrepit. A fireplace large enough to stand in. Bookshelves that held volumes she was already cataloging by instinct. He set her bag at the foot of the stairs and stood with his back to her, looking at the cold fireplace. I am not angry at you, he said. I want to be precise about that. What I am, he stopped. Rebuilt the sentence. I am afraid of what it would mean to lose you. That is new information for me. I am adjusting to it. She crossed the room and stood beside him, not touching, looking at the same cold fireplace. I'm adjusting to some new information too, she said. We can be bad at it together. He turned to look at her, and in the dark house, with the trees pressing close outside, and the old walls holding their silence around them, she saw it plainly on his face for the first time. Not the controlled version. Not the thing he'd taught himself to present, but the actual, unarchitected feeling of a man who had stopped running from something without quite meaning to. There's firewood in the store beside the kitchen, he said finally, his voice not entirely steady. Then make a fire, she said. I'll find the tea. It was not a resolution. It was not an answer to the enormous, complicated thing sitting between them in the dark. But it was the next honest thing, and they were both. She was learning. People who moved toward honest things even when they were frightening, especially then. Chapter 9. The education of 2 people who should know better. Days settled into a rhythm that felt borrowed from a quieter life, the kind neither of them had quite managed to live before. Cyril worked mornings at the long oak table in the main room. Her translation spread across 3 screens. She'd connected with a pragmatism that looked slightly absurd against the backdrop of medieval stonework. The university press, blessedly, required only a working internet connection and the willingness to pretend the outside world was not currently complicated. She provided both. Celine kept to the upper rooms until early afternoon, and she had stopped feeling the quiet of those hours as absence and started feeling it as something closer to companionable solitude, to people occupying the same space on different schedules without the scheduling becoming a wound. He emerged each afternoon like weather, gradual, inevitable. Already mid-thought. It was on the third afternoon that she asked him to teach her the covenant, she said, without looking up from her manuscript. Properly. Not the summary version you give to humans. You're trying not to alarm. The actual architecture of it. He settled into the chair across from her. He had a chair now, properly his, angled toward both the window and the room the way she had noticed he always positioned himself. Why? Because I'm translating a 13th century church document that keeps referencing blood law obligations in language that sounds suspiciously non-ecclesiastical. She turned the screen toward him. And because if I'm going to be in the middle of your world's politics, I'd rather understand the legal framework than navigate by instinct. He read the screen. Something crossed his face. The expression she had come to recognize as genuine surprise wearing its rarely used clothes. This is a covenant tributary document, he said. The church was a co-signatory to the original treaty. It was part of how the houses maintained access to. He stopped. How much do you want to know? Everything, she said. Start at the beginning. He did, over the following evenings. By firelight and lamplight, he taught her. Not as a lecturer. He didn't have that particular condescension in him, but as a man retrieving something long stored, dusting it off carefully, finding that the act of explaining rebuilt the thing being explained into something more bearable than it had been in solitude. The covenant, she learned, was older than its 8th century. Formalization, its roots lay in agreements struck when the houses were young, and the world was smaller, and the arithmetic of coexistence was simple enough that blood law could be written down and held. 4 houses, 4 territories, feeding strictly consensual. Documented in the old courts through what he called the Accord of Given Blood, a ceremony she initially found archaic and then, as he described it, recognized as something close to a medical ethics protocol, evolved from necessity rather than ideology. The houses that survive, he said one evening, watching the fire from his chair, while she sat cross-legged on the hearthrug with her sketchbook, making notes in the margins of a rough map she'd drawn, are the ones that understood the covenant wasn't a restriction. It was a technology, a system for managing coexistence across long time spans. He paused. Varric understood this once. In the early centuries, they were the covenant's most rigorous adherents. The blood farms developed later, slowly, in the deep infrastructure where the law's light didn't quite reach. Power without accountability, she said. It's not a vampire problem. It's just a problem. He looked at her over the fire. No, he said quietly. It isn't. She sketched while he talked, not always illustrations of what he described, sometimes just the shape of his voice rendered into line, the architecture of these evenings. She had filled 12 pages before she noticed she was doing it. On the 5th evening, she taught him something in return. It happened accidentally. She had been on a call with her university press contact, a harried woman named Dr. Pelletier, who communicated exclusively in run-on sentences and had apparently not noticed that Sierra's circumstances had changed in any meaningful way, and afterwards she had been laughing, quietly, and to herself, at something Dr. Pelletier had said about the departmental politics of medieval studies, which apparently rivaled the covenant in Byzantine complexity. Seelan had been watching her from the kitchen doorway. You laugh at things that aren't jokes, he said. They're jokes, she said. Just small ones. The kind that aren't trying to be funny. They just are because the situation is absurd. She looked at him. When did you last laugh at something? He considered this with the seriousness he brought to most questions, which made it both endearing and faintly melancholy. I don't remember. That's the answer I expected. She stood, stretching. Come here. She made him sit at the table while she told him about Dr. Pelletier, the full version. The running saga of a woman who had been in academic conflict with the same colleague for 11 years over the correct interpretation of a single Carolingian footnote. She told it straight, without performance. Just the flat absurdity of it. And somewhere around the 4th episode, he made a sound. Quiet, brief, rusty with disuse. That was unmistakably a laugh. He looked briefly astonished at himself. There, she said. That was not. He stopped. That was involuntary. They all are, when they're real. She propped her chin on her hand, watching him. You've been carrying everything at the correct weight for too long. Some things need to be carried lightly. He looked at her across the table. Candlelight moved in his eyes, amber and warm. And she saw it again. The thing she had no adequate name for. The feeling that lived in the space between what he showed and what he was. Alar used to say something similar, he said. His voice was even, but the evenness was effortful in a way it hadn't been for weeks. That I treated joy like a debt I hadn't yet earned. She was right, Sierra said gently. And she'd probably be furious that you've spent 400 years proving her right. He was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, she would have been. A pause. She was quite furious, in general. It was one of her better qualities. Sierra smiled. Not at the grief, but at the love still moving through it, still alive beneath the centuries of careful management. Tell me about her. He did. For the first time, she thought, told her in full sentences rather than the careful fragments he'd offered before. A woman who had been a herbalist's assistant in a city that no longer existed under that name. Who had been unreasonably competent and relentlessly practical, and entirely without patience for what she called his ancient dignity. Who had loved him with the particular ferocity of a mortal woman, aware that her time was finite, and determined not to waste a single hour of it, being cautious. When he finished, the room was very quiet. But it was a full quiet rather than an empty one. She sounds wonderful, Sierra said. She was. He looked at his hands. She would have liked you. The fire breathed between them. Outside, the forest moved in a wind that carried the first cold promise of autumn, and somewhere in the dark hills an owl made its presence known and then withdrew into silence. What are we doing, Seelan? She asked, softly, without pressure. A genuine question, asked the way she asked all genuine questions, directly and without dressing. He looked up. His face carried all the things she'd mapped over these weeks. The severity and the grief and the particular ancient loneliness, but underneath them now, present as the bones beneath skin, something newer, something that had not been there in the alleyway on the Rue des Cendres. I think, he said carefully, we are learning to be honest with each other about what we want, which is not the same as knowing what to do about it. No, she agreed. But it's a better starting point than most people get. He reached across the table slowly, with the care he brought to anything that mattered, and set his hand beside hers. Not over it, not claiming, simply close. She turned her hand and let her fingers rest against his. Outside, the owl called once more. The fire settled. The old house held them in its stone silence, and for one long unhurried evening, nothing hunted them, and nothing was required of them. And they sat at the edge of something enormous and did not rush toward it, because some things are only real if you let them arrive at their own pace. Chapter 10. What she chose, and what it cost. And what it built. Varric came on a Thursday before dawn, when the forest was entirely dark and entirely silent in the way that had stopped feeling peaceful 3 days ago. Sierra woke to Seelan's hand on her shoulder. Not urgent, not panicked, simply present, the way he did everything that mattered. She was alert before she was fully conscious, sitting up in the gray dark of the stone bedroom, with her pulse already steady, because somewhere over the past weeks, steady had become her default. How many, she said. 10. They've learned from last time. His voice was quiet as the house around them. A senior blade keeper leads them. House Varric doesn't send blade keepers for extractions. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This is termination. She was out of bed and moving before the word finished landing. The spray bottles were already distributed. She had restocked them 2 days ago when the forest cats disappeared. Because she had been paying attention, because paying attention had become the primary survival skill of her current life. She took 2. The grow lamp was charged. She had also, over the preceding days, made modifications she hadn't mentioned to Seelan because she knew he would object, and she knew she was right. The east window, she said, pulling on her coat. Ground floor. The frame is iron, original construction. He looked at her. If you can drive them toward the east face of the building, she said, the window frame becomes a contact barrier. They can't pass through it at speed without damage. It slows them. She met his eyes. I'll be on the upper landing with the lamp and the bottles. Elevation advantage. You work the ground floor. I work from above. We're not fighting, we're funneling. Sierra Seelan, the name, and the tone, and the steadiness under it. Trust me. He looked at her for one long moment in the pre-dawn dark. This woman in her borrowed coat in his borrowed house. Entirely mortal and entirely unintimidated. And something in him made a decision she could see but not yet name. Don't engage directly, he said. If one gets past me, storage room, iron door. I know. She checked the spray bottle. Go. What followed was not cinematic in the way she had once imagined violence might be. It was loud and precise and terrifying and very fast. And she stayed on the upper landing with the lamp angled down and did exactly what she had said she would do. Funneled, disrupted, covered in sealant moved below her like something the dark had given temporary permission to be dangerous. The blade keeper reached the stairs. He was older than the others, she could feel it. The particular pressure of deep age in the way he moved, unhurried and absolute. His eyes finding her on the landing with the calm recognition of a professional locating a variable. She hit him with the full lamp at point-blank range. He recoiled. She followed with the bottle, both bottles. The entire reserve, and the sound he made was not something she would carry lightly. But she held her ground because holding her ground was the only option that kept Seelan's back covered. And keeping Seelan's back covered was the only thing that mattered in this particular moment of this particular night. The blade keeper fell back. Below, the last of the 10 was dealt with in a silence that felt absolute, then quiet. The real kind, aftermath-shaped, full of ringing and the smell of iron and the sound of her own breathing. Seelan came up the stairs. He was bloodied, his own and not his own, and his eyes found her immediately. Did the same rapid accounting he always did now, when they had been separated by danger. The checking that she was whole. Done, he said. Done, she confirmed. He crossed to her into steps and took her face in his hands. Cold hands, careful hands, hands that had been making and unmaking history since before her country had a name, and looked at her with an expression so unguarded, it cost her breath. I need to tell you something, he said. Tell me. Sitting down, she said. My legs have opinions. They sat on the stone steps as the sky began its slow gray renegotiation with morning. The forest coming back to itself around them, and he told her, the blood oath could be permanently anchored not through claiming, not through possession but through equal partnership. A binding freely chosen on both sides, that stabilized the oath beyond any possibility of extraction, that made the Northern Territory's protection a matter of shared stewardship rather than solitary endurance. It would require a blood sharing, witnessed by the neutral house, the fourth house, which still existed in the East, which still honored the original covenant, and it would change her, not immediately, not irreversibly, not without her full understanding of every stage. The change would be gradual, contingent at each step on her continued consent. She would begin to age differently. She would begin to perceive the world as he did, more slowly, more deeply, across longer spans. She would eventually, if she chose every step of the way, become something between what she was and what he was, or, he said, and his voice carried the full weight of a man who had made peace with every outcome except her unhappiness. I find another way to protect the oath that doesn't involve you at all. I have time. I have always had time. You live your life, your full, complete, mortal life, and I ensure Varric never has reason to look at you again. He paused. That is also a real option. I want you to know it is a real option. She looked at the forest. The first birds were beginning tentative, testing the silence to see if it had finished being dangerous. If I stay, she said carefully, I need it to be a partnership, not protection, not possession, not you deciding alone what risks I'm permitted to take. She turned to look at him. Equal standing. My choices remain mine, including every choice about the process you described. I stop at any stage I choose, and that is honored absolutely. Yes, he said, without hesitation. And you stop apologizing for needing someone. She held his gaze. You stop treating your own loneliness like a debt you're too guilty to collect on. He was quiet for a long moment. The amber in his eyes had the quality of early light now, warmer, less defended. That, he said softly, may take longer than the rest. Good thing we'd have time, she said. He took her hand, properly, fully, fingers threading through hers with the deliberate care of a man who had been practicing restraint for so long that choosing otherwise felt like learning a new language in real time. Sir Voss, he said, I have not asked anything of the future in a very long time. I know, she said. I'm asking now. The sun came over the tree line and fell across the stone steps and across them both. And he did not move away from it, sat in it, let it find him. The way a man finally stops avoiding something he has decided to walk toward instead. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Then let's build something, she said, carefully, honestly, on our own terms. He said nothing, but his hand tightened around hers, and the forest filled with morning birds. And the old house stood behind them in the new light, patient as stone. having kept its silence through all of it and asking nothing in return. 3 months later, the Covenant's neutral house witnessed a voluntary blood sharing in a ceremony older than most nations. House Varek's bid for the Northern Territory was legally closed. The Blade Keeper recovered, furious, politically outmaneuvered, filed a formal challenge that the neutral house dismissed in 11 minutes. Sira finished her ecclesiastical translation. Dr. Pelletier called it the most authoritative interpretation of Carolingian blood law scholarship had ever produced. Without understanding entirely why, the ceramic mug lived on a windowsill in the stone house. She remembered to drink from it now. Some mornings, she woke to cold hands setting it beside her, still warm. She was learning slowly to hold it before it cooled.